What's up, pod pals? It's your buddy Adam, and you're listening to Podcasting Business School, the show where I teach podcasters how to love their podcast like a hobby and build it like a business. And today we've got a podcast audit session with my pod pal, Claudia. And this is a unique one. I haven't done one of these in a very long time. She's getting ready to launch. She has not launched her show yet. So it's kind of like a pre-podcast audit. Very excited about this. And I think I'll be able to add some new perspective and some new flavors to our podcast launch game plan. So if you are somebody out there that's thinking about launching a show, I think this will be especially valuable for you. So Claudia, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adam. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So let's dig on in here. The first thing I'd love to dive into a little bit and kind of map out is who you're trying to serve with your show. Because I feel like anybody that's just getting ready to launch a show, that's if you can think through that filter and keep that as the through line message the whole time you're a podcaster, who am I trying to serve? How am I going to best serve them? Then you're going to have a great show. So who are we trying to serve here with your show?
Well, I'm a health behavior change coach, and I am trying to serve women in the stages of perimenopause and menopause and postmenopause. So yeah, just the women between the ages of 40 and really 60, probably.
Okay, cool. So I feel like that's a great niche. I feel like those women are out there looking for answers. So this could be very effective. And I think one of the key things, obviously, is like anytime you launch, we want to look at the organic growth opportunities first with like the naming, the SEO, the keywords we want to show up for, and just really take advantage of, when you're a brand new show on Apple or Spotify. Some people will debate this, but I still think it's a thing where they give you a little extra exposure, a little extra love. Like I've helped a lot of people launch. I've consulted on a lot of launches, and I really feel like that's a thing where we see this surge where people are finding them more easily and they're very searchable if they're using the right keywords. And so we want to have your game plan optimized for that. Does that make sense so far?
Oh yeah, that completely makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So you have a name that you're kind of working on. So what name did you come up with to kind of get the conversation started as far as naming and SEO?
Well, fuel your midlife is the name I came up with.
Okay, cool. So fuel your midlife,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that is a great base for a show name. And I think we could maybe optimize it a little bit because one of my, I've got my little checklist for a perfect podcast name. And one of the things is who is it for? Another one is what's it about? And then the third thing is we got to have at least one keyword in there. Now, midlife is a keyword. I feel like that's an identifying term. So we're off to a great start. And I feel like it describes like fuel your midlife. Like, okay, like this is about thriving in midlife. This is, that is very clear to me. I think we could extend the title just a little bit and get some really nice SEO and have your ideal listener / client really perk up and go, OMG, that one's for me. This is my girl. This is who I need to learn from. So in the information that you sent me, you talk about your show description and you mentioned this is a podcast for perimenopausal and menopausal women seeking a balanced and empowering approach to health. I think we should use a section of that as a title extension. So fuel your midlife, tips for, I think the word menopause is going to be a searchable, like I feel like that's the term that people are going to search as opposed to like perimenopause, premenopause, like I feel like the word menopause is the key thing to have in there. So I would say something along the lines of tips for women navigating menopause as they optimize their health, or something like having the word health and having the word menopause in there is going to be gold for everything that you do moving forward. So I feel like that's, advice for or conversations on optimizing or navigate. I like the word navigating or help with navigating your menopause journey, helping women navigate their menopause journey and optimize their health. So just kind of having, I think no matter what you say and how you say it, having the word menopause and health in the title line as a title extension that's really, really going to help you. So are you following on that so far? Is that all making sense?
Yeah, that completely makes sense to me. I just wasn't sure how long the title could actually be. So I was trying to
Yeah.
make it short, but I can definitely see where adding those words or similar words to it would um, attract my ideal
Yeah.
client better.
Yeah. And this is a very common issue with a lot of podcasters. They're like, it needs to be short and specific. And like the main title of the brand, like welcome to the Fuel Your Life podcast, Fuel Your Midlife podcast. Like that's the title of the show. That's the name of the brand. Like that's totally fine. But just from a podcast searchability and SEO standpoint, we want to add that little extension in there. And honestly, like I've got a big long extension on mine. Like I only mentioned podcasting business school, but I've got, podcasting tips for service providers, online coaches, blah, 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 blah. Like I've got all this big long extension, and all it does is help the right people find your show. And I've seen a really nice uptick for my own show and for everybody else's show. Great example is with one of my clients I worked with over a year ago. She was getting about 40 downloads per episode. And then all we did was update the name of her show and her podcast art, which we'll talk about in a second. And she went from 40 downloads per episode. A year later, she checks in. She did over 100,000 downloads that year. So massive difference, massive difference. And that's the only thing we changed. And sometimes that little SEO key, we put that in the door and it unlocks your right people finding you organically, that you don't have to spend money on ads for. You don't have to post on Instagram a million times for. So that's why we want to make this right as soon as possible. So the fact that you haven't launched yet, this is a great place to be. So all that making sense so far?
Oh yeah, that completely makes sense. Yep.
Okay, cool. So the next thing I want to look at for your show launch is the art. So we have, the main name, Fuel Your Midlife. Like I would feature that. I like making the words the star of the show as much as possible. I like using big, thick, chunky text, font wise. So it's very easy to read on a phone, because somebody searches menopause, your show pops up. There's going to be 10 other shows that pop up on that phone. So that's already on a small phone screen, getting smaller with all those images. We want the words that are going to be very attractive to those people to draw their eyes to your image first, and they click on your image, because it's very unlikely they will go to multiple shows on that search and start listening to multiple podcasts from all these different shows. Very unlikely. Usually one of those 10 or 20 that pop up are going to win. So we want you to win with the art that you create. So I want Fuel Your Midlife real big. I want the word midlife in a different color, like a highlighted color almost, because that's the attractive word. Then you have your little subtitle somewhere, usually along the bottom. I like to put a highlight color behind that so it all stands, but then again, highlight menopause and health in a different color than the main body of the text. So that's something that it's a very attractive visual, that those keywords, so midlife, menopause, and health, are all kind of standing out. They're kind of like those red flashing lights of like, come and look at this show first. Then once you get all that mapped out, so kind of visually thinking, if this is me, I'm probably going to left align this where it's like fuel to the left side, top left corner, your directly underneath it, midlife, longer word highlighted, then have your title extension underneath that at the bottom. That's going to create a pocket of space in the top right corner of your image. And for you, I would put a picture of you in there, because I feel like you're somebody that is representing your message. And it's just like, I think anytime that's the case, where you're kind of calling out a specific group and you represent that group, or you're a leader amongst that group, and you want to be relatable, it's a great opportunity to stick your image in there. For me, it doesn't make sense to put, first off, I've got a giant head. Like that would take up way too much space. Like, is this the Bald Man podcast? I don't know what's happening. Is this podcast sponsored by the Skull Shaver? Like, what's going on here? So that just eliminates that immediately. But that right pocket, you could put like a podcast microphone image. That's where we can kind of dress it up a little bit. And the mistake a lot of newer podcasters make is they'll put a great big picture of their face or a microphone or something. And that's like the thing that eats up the most space out of that square. And they do little tiny cursive font around it that nobody can read. And they're really missing out on that second half of that organic growth because their keywords are working, but their image doesn't draw the right eyeballs to their show first, and they don't get first dibs. So if it was me, left aligned, fuel your midlife. Midlife, I would try to make it stretch across the entire square, creates a pocket in the top right corner, put an image of you up there, microphone, something, dress it up, have the banner at the bottom, highlight health and menopause. We got a winning brand right there. So I'll put a pin in it right there. Any questions or thoughts on what we just talked about there?
The only question I have is, do you think it's important to get professional pictures, or do you think just like a good, like well taken picture that you take yourself, and like, what do you think?
Honestly, I mean, you can do wonders on Canva. Like I've all my images for all my brand stuff were like taken on like my iPhone 8. I've got the latest version of the iPhone 8. Everybody makes fun of me. And I would just set the little timer and I would go and pose, and then I'll remove the background and no complaints. So, yeah. So I think the other advantage of doing that is like you kind of see how your words map out, and you see what kind of space you're working with. And maybe it's, you want to look like you're leaning on one of the letters or something like that. So you can take that picture on your phone and you're like, it's like the perfect pose that fits to like make the picture that fits you exactly in that space that's open. And you're kind of chilling out, leaning against the letters. You can do cool stuff with it. So I would try that and just remove the background on Canva. That way you've got just you, and you can put you in there and mess around with it. And I think that would be pretty cool. And I think it'll end up looking good. So how's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I've used Canva before. I just wasn't sure. Like, I mean, as if, let's say when the podcast grows, I'm just wondering how important it is to have like a more professional appearance. But I'm thinking with Canva, I can probably create something that's pretty professional right off the bat.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's like, I would say if you take phone cameras are so freaking great now. Like it's not that much different. And you dress it up on Canva, you're like 85, 90% good. And people aren't going to go, oh my gosh, not hiring her. Obviously an iPhone picture. Like I'm more about relatability, becoming the people's champion. Like I want, like, if you've got listeners that are busy moms, they've got their career, they're dealing with the kid situation, their significant other, and all this stuff is happening to their body, and they're looking for answers, and they're like looking for help and advice. They're not going to be concerned with what if your picture is taken on a phone or a professional or whatever. Like if you have good stuff and they relate to you, that's how you win the game. Like let's focus on that 100%. So I appreciate you thinking about that. Like that lets me know that you're pretty serious about this. You're like, well, do I need professional pictures or not? But I would rather, take that money from professional pictures and let's maybe invest it in some podcast player app ads or something like that during your launch. And that, I think you'll get more bang for your buck there. Does that make sense?
oh, that completely makes sense. Yeah, I get it. Mhm.
Okay. So those are the two things I wanted to cover for sure today as we chat, because those are two areas where people can really mess it up and miss out on organic growth when it comes to actually getting your podcast live, launched, and marketed. What types of questions do you have?
I think I have a few questions. I mean, I'll just start off with one that comes first to the top of my mind is, I guess there's a little bit of a concern that I'll be able to create weekly content. And I think that's probably one of my biggest fears, is that I'll get started, but then I'll start struggling with weekly content and, just give up because of that. So I guess my question is how to be consistent, I guess. How,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I know it's just do it, but do you have any tips for making sure that you stay on track when it comes to creating consistent content?
Yes. Okay. Again, you're thinking along the right terms. Like, I like how your brain is working around this. I can tell again that you're not just going in like, let's just see what happens. I'm gonna go hang out and produce some stuff. And like you've got a serious mindset around this, which I appreciate and applaud. And I want to say that I feel like every podcaster has this exact same worry. Like, oh my God, like I've got things to talk about. But what do I talk about at episode 1000? Like how do I keep talking about stuff? So we've got our core topics, and I'll help you come up with a strategy to make sure that we'll have a never-ending amount of content that we can pour into our audience. But one just quick thought is that I feel like there are core subjects that down the road, like I have certain topics that I make sure I talk about every single year on the show. So I'm approaching episode 400 as we record this, 7 years into podcasting, 3.5, 4 years into this show. And I repeat certain very important topics because not everybody goes back and listens to every episode. And there are certain things like podcast growth and monetization. I've got fresh opinions on topics and things like that. So if you've got this wheelhouse of 20 or 25 topics that you feel like, all right, these are really important. If somebody just found my show and they're not going to go back and listen, I have to make sure I mention these every year, every 100 episodes or something like that. So that I hope gives you confidence of like, we can repeat. It's not take the old episode and re-air it. It's take that topic and freshen it up and talk about it once a year, once every 100 episodes or so. So is that making sense so far?
Yeah, I think that's something that I haven't done so much on my Instagram. Either in my stories or on my feed page, I have a tendency to feel like I have to come up with new content like constantly. But like you said, I think it's really important to hear the same messages over and over again. Cause even if you
Yeah.
hear them once, like I've listened to your podcast many times and I've heard the same message, but it doesn't always like absorb immediately.
Yeah.
It takes time to, process it and digest it, remember it. So, and there's certain things that are like super important that need to be talked about very regularly. So
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense.
Well, and I love your point, like the listening context, and where somebody's at listening to the information and where you're at in your own personal journey, teaching the information. That's always different. So there's a lot of angles of approach there. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to like, I love when I'm consulting on a launch, I will set a goal of 52 episodes. I'm like, let's not necessarily in order, but I want you to have a 52 episode idea bank of where we can pull from. So if you do one episode per week, that's going to get you through your first year. And that's kind of like, especially if somebody hires me, I'm like, you're going to get to a year and you don't even think about quitting until you get to a year. Like that's a pact. That's like a blood pact that we make because so many people quit after 10. Like 80% of podcasts don't make it past 10 episodes, which is sad and that sucks. And I'm working as hard as I can to make that a better stat for all of us. So when we look at that first 52 episodes, I love weekly content. I highly recommend finding a way to do that. But we can do that in different ways. So as you're a service provider, if you're like, Adam, just tell me what to do, here's what I tell you to do. I want 2/3 of your content to feature you as the expert. So that's going to be solo episodes. You can do coaching episodes like what we've got here. Starting out, I would lean into solo hard and then start looking at doing coaching episodes like this. If you have clients, you could do client success episodes. That would be a very similar vein to this. And then we've got potential guests. So if we go 2/3 content over 52 episodes, if I'm doing the math right in my head, that's going to be 37 You're the Expert episodes and 15 interview episodes. So we've got a 37 item list and a 15 item list for our 52 episodes. So with the 15 item list of potential guests, I want you to go on social media. I want you to look at other podcasts that you listen to and just kind of make a 15-person list of who would I love to have on my show and feature them the first year of my show. So that's going to knock out 15 and just kind of dream big and like, it is what it is. So we can lean into that. Then on that 37 list, I want you to go through and list as many solo topics as you can, just like stream of consciousness, spend 10 minutes and like really unpack your processes. If you've got a 10-step process, those could be 10 episodes. That may not be one super long episode. That could be 10 episodes. So very bite size. I mean, the solo episode can be 10 minutes long, 15. Mine kind of end up in the 20-ish range a lot of times. So these don't have to be hour-long conversations. You could sit down for an hour or 90 minutes and record 4 or 5 solo episodes and have a lot of content for the next several weeks. So make that list of solo episode topics, and then make a list of, like, if you have clients, that you could do client success, like case study episodes. Like maybe you've got 5 clients that are willing to come on. So that eats into that 37 as well. So that, I feel like with those 3 types of episodes, you can have a really nice 52 episode game plan to pull from. And then we go, okay, I want to launch. I recommend launching with 4 episodes. And the first episode, I want it to be all about you. So it's kind of your story, your experience with the niche that you're operating in, what the successes you've had with your clients, your goals for the show, what people can expect from the show, all that kind of just setting the table for the conversations you're about to have. And then with the other 3 episodes, I want some different flavors. I want some different topics. So what I would recommend is do 2 more solo episodes and have 1 guest in there. And the 2 solo episodes, I want kind of like hot button topics, like something that's going to be pretty interesting right off the get-go. And then the interview, hopefully somebody that maybe has a little bit of a larger audience than some other guests that you might have on. They're prevalent on social media, or maybe they've got a podcast and they're going to talk on a topic that I want to make sure they don't directly compete with you. Like it's kind of complementary services, complementary messages. That's an ideal launch platter. And we launch with those 4 episodes. They're live and we're off and running. So I'm going to pump my brakes. How's all this sounding, feeling? Any questions off of what we just talked about there?
No, that all makes sense. I do already have a list. I probably have about 30 topics on it, and I
Nice.
created it in probably less than 10 minutes. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but that's all really interesting. And also bringing on a guest that provides complimentary services sounds like a really good idea. But yeah, all of that really makes sense.
Good. And you don't necessarily have to have guests. Like as a service provider, you can do way less than that 1/3. Like I kind of do like 1/6 to 1/8 of my content has a guest on it. And I go through seasons, like, last couple months, I've been having a few more guests on, and that's just kind of how the way the content is shaken out, and just is what it is. So, keep that in mind. Those it's 2/3 minimum content. You're positioning yourself as the expert. So if you've got, I had a feeling you could knock out those solo episode topics. Most of us do. If I'm like, sit down for 10 minutes and just write down solo topics, they're like, yeah, I got this. And
Mhm.
so that should give you plenty of confidence there. Now with the guests, pro tip, I want you to really prioritize guests that you could leverage that relationship in some way, shape, or form. So maybe they have a podcast that you would be a great fit for, because that would be ideal. So that's really my first filter. I recorded a recent episode where I talked about this. But if I'm going to have somebody sit in that guest seat, I really want them to have a podcast that I haven't been on yet that I could potentially be on, because I'll have them on my show first. I'll make friends with them. And a lot of times I end up, I'm pretty good at making friends, and they invite me on their show, and away we go. Now we've got a nice little collaboration. Or maybe I just want to get to know them because they know somebody that I want to have on the show. Like, it's okay as podcasters to be a little bit selfish and go, what am I getting out of this interview? I'm letting them come on my platform. I'm sharing my ecosystem with them. They're adding value. That's a huge value add for us. But also, is there another benefit or other mutual benefits with collaboration opportunities, things like that? So kind of look at that with your guest list, like who has podcasts, who's got really nice social media following that we want to leverage, because that helps you be strategic when you do those interviews and you're like, okay, this person's got a giant Instagram following. They don't have a podcast. What's the next level opportunity for me? If I'm that person doing the interview, at the end of the session, I'm going to go, hey, great interview. This is going to be live on such and such date. You know what? I would love to do an Instagram live follow-up interview with you when this goes live to promote it. my audience can ask you questions, and most people will say yes. And I've had great success with that. We'll just follow up interviews, and I get a bunch of Instagram followers, and lots of cool things happen. So be strategic when you have somebody in that guest chair. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's given me some ideas. So, yeah,
Cool.
good.
All right. So I feel like we talked about the name, the title extension, the art, the first year of episodes, and your first 4 launch episodes. So we've pushed the needle down the road here, and
Mhm.
I feel pretty good about this. So you feel like your confidence is building up a little bit with your launch?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yes, you've definitely given me some really valuable tips that I otherwise wouldn't have even thought of when it comes to extending the title and the artwork and just the way I think about collaborations and all of that. So, yeah, it's good.
Outstanding. That was the goal. All right, cool. Well, I want to make sure that we get to shout you out so people can follow you on social media, your website, all of that. And of course, once the show is live and launched, we'll be able to go out there and subscribe and follow. So go ahead and shout out your brand a little bit, Claudia.
Okay. Well, I am on Instagram as Fuel Your Midlife, and I do not currently have a website. I am working on that. That'll be the name of the podcast, also Fuel Your Midlife. And I am on Facebook, but I haven't really started working on that quite yet, as far as working on the page. So the best place to find me is probably Instagram.
Outstanding. All right. Well, if you all are out there wanting to be on the show and do a podcast audit, just like my pod pal Claudia, head on over to the website, www.podcastingbusiness.school, podcastingbusiness.school, and get signed up. We'd love to have you on the show so we can collaborate and create some awesome content together. And with that, my pod pals, I'm going to send you all out into the wilderness, wishing you health, happiness, and many downloads. We'll see you next time.